Hey guys, Tom here again from synthhacker.com. Welcome back to another sound design tutorial for Serum. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at my recreation of the Diablo and Zonderling track No Good. Specifically in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I made the bass sound from scratch, and then in a future video, we're going to be looking at the lead as well. So let's just have a listen to the track, and then we'll begin making this bass sound from scratch. That's not good for me! So really nice, aggressive, crunchy bass sound. There's a few layers going on which I'll just go over now. So this is the bass sound we're going to be recreating. And then that has like a sub layer underneath it. And then we've also got this kind of like rhythmic sub element as well. Really cool. And so if I demonstrate this all together, we get this. Works really well together. So just to quickly run over these sub layers in case you're interested. They're very basic, like this first sub, which is just underneath our main bass sound, is just a square wave from the sub oscillator, just basically low pass with a bit of distortion. Also just a bit of decapitator on here as well to add some more distortion. And then our rhythmic sub is pretty much the same, except the envelope's got like a bit more of like a sharper attack to it. Again, just low passed square wave with a bit of decapitator and just a bit of like EQ and stuff. Pretty basic. So here we have a completely initialized patch in Serum, so we can begin making the bass sound. We're using two oscillators for this sound. We're going to use the Reese wavetable. And then I'm also going to pitch them both down an octave as well. Now, one thing that I noticed from the bass sound in the original track is it sounds like really wide. And there's a few different ways you could approach this, but the way that I settled on was simply panning one oscillator to the left and one oscillator to the right. The issue with this at this point in the sound is because both of these waveforms are exactly the same, this technique isn't going to work because the exact same sound is going to be played from both speakers, so we're just going to perceive it to be in the middle. So the way to make this work is essentially to slightly change the sound of each of these oscillators so that you kind of perceive them to be separate in the stereo field. So the way I did this was just set up an LFO here, drag this back a little bit, curve this down a little bit. I set this to envelope mode, kept it on BPM and anchor, and just set this to a rate of a half. Then what we can do is change the watt mode to band plus on both of these. And just to demonstrate the sound before we start using the watt modes, I'll just show you what this sounds like. So that's just like the basic tone from our waveforms, and as you can tell, it sounds like it's in the center of the stereo field. However, once we start modulating the watt mode of each of these oscillators, move this up a little bit, and then we want to bring this over here and modulate this one as well. And if you look at the waveforms when we play the sound, you can see that the waveforms are different for both oscillators, and you can also hear that the sound is much wider. So that's a really cool starting point. The other thing that we're going to do is add a sub layer to the sound. However, instead of pitching this down an octave below our oscillators, we're actually going to keep it at the default octave. And the reason for this is because these complex bass sounds, you typically end up doing a lot of modulation on them and, stacking effects, sometimes even resampling. And although that can produce really cool sounds, the downside of that is sometimes it becomes so harmonically complex that you kind of lose a sense of what the original note of the sound was. So a really good way to remedy that with sounds like this is to layer a sub oscillator on top of the sound so you can still hear the pitch of the note. So that's just really useful. We are going to bring the level of this down a little bit, and now we have this. We're also just going to add a noise layer. We're going to use the ARP circuit and just keep the level about where it is really. The other thing we're going to do is just modulate our amplitude envelope, and now we have this. So moving into the effects, the first thing in the effects chain that I used was some distortion to really kind of drive the sound. I really liked the sound of this sine fold. What I did for this was bring the drive down a little bit and then bring the mix down just below the midpoint. And then we're going to use our LFO that we set up earlier to modulate the mix of the distortion. And this is really cool because it adds a lot of movement to the sound. Instead of just adding like a static distortion, this just kind of breathes a bit of life into the sound. Really, really cool. And you'll have noticed that I didn't actually use the filter in the main section of the sound. This was because I wanted to use a filter in the effects. But yeah, I just used a low pass 24 dB filter. And the reason for this was just to kind of tame the effect that the distortion was having. So we're going to keep the mix to full. However, we're going to use the same LFO again, just to control the cutoff of this. So you can hear that that kind of helps control the sound a little bit. Again, it just helps add to the movement. And one mistake that I think I see a lot of people making when they try make these complex bass sounds is using a lot of different LFOs on different parts of the sound. And although you can sometimes end up with cool results using like multiple LFOs, a lot of the time it's much more effective to just use the same LFO on multiple parameters in the synth. That way there's a lot more kind of like cohesion in the sound, with everything moving in unison with one another. The other thing we're going to do is add a little bit of multiband compression. We're going to keep the mix down a little bit, just below halfway. What we're going to do though is actually place this after the filter, and this is what we get. So that's pretty much everything in the synth. The other thing you might want to do is just make sure that the sound is mono so you don't get clashing notes in your mix. The next thing I'm going to go over is the effects that I added after Serum. The first effect that we used was an audio effect rack to split the signal into two separate paths, a dry path with no effects and then a wet path, and then you can control the balance between these two. So I'll just show you what it sounds like. You can hear there that you can hear the dry sound and the reverb, but what's actually happening here is the dry sound is pushing the reverb out of the way using sidechain compression. So our dry signal is just blank, and then our wet signal has a Valhalla Room reverb here set to 100%. We also have some EQ just to remove some of the muddy low end out of the reverb and roll off some of the highs, and then just a bit of sidechain compression to move the reverb out of the way of the dry signal. And then you can just use the levels here to balance the mix between the two. Next, I just added a little bit of EQ. It creates room for the sub layer that I mentioned earlier. And then finally, to really top the sound off, I put the whole thing, including the reverb, through Decapitator. And this really adds a lot of kind of distortion and grit to the sound. I just used a pretty basic preset in here with quite a lot of drive, the dry wet mix all the way up as well. And that's what this sounds like. So without, and then with. Just sounds great for that like really kind of like overdriven sound. So just to demonstrate the sound we've just created in the mix. And there you go, that's how to create a really cool distorted wide bass sound in Serum with a little help of some external effects as well. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It was really fun to make. I covered quite a few useful techniques that I think could be applied to a lot of different sounds that you guys are creating. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe and click the notification bell to stay up to date with new tutorials that I release. Also, if you haven't done so already, feel free to check out my social media like my Twitter and Instagram, which I'll include down below. And also feel free to check out the Discord server as well. We've now got over like 300, I think we're closing on 400 people in there. And it's been amazing to see everyone kind of like helping each other out with sound design related questions, music production, feedback, collabs, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, check that out. I'll leave a link down below. And yeah, that covers everything, guys. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. As always, guys, if you've not done so already, feel free to check out my preset and sample packs over at synthhacker.com. Every purchase on there includes the presets from this tutorial as well as all my other tutorials. You'll also receive a free email update with presets from future tutorials as well. So thanks for all the support so far, and thanks in advance for checking that out. I really do appreciate it.